Sans plus tarder, laissez-moi vous présenter le colonel Douglas A. Macgregor. Bonjour.
Bonjour, pardonnez-moi, je suis américain, mon français n'est pas très bon.
C'est pas grave, je vais être là pour assister tout ça, colonel. Et puis, I'm going to be there to assist you, Colonel. And I understand you're from Washington now. You're around surrounding Washington?
Yes, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay, well, glad to meet you today. I know you've been with us to pay a tribute to General Delaware, and we're glad for that. French General.
Yeah, General, I was very depressed when I received the news of General Delaware's passing. He was, well, let's put it this way: France lost a great soldier and a great man.
Yeah, we were glad. He was collaborating regularly on our channel. He was there. He likes what we said and what we exchanged with him, and he was very there. So we were sad too to lose lost. That's a great loss for the channel. But I mean, at least we have other people that can be there also.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Also, I was saying you're the author of many books, eh? That we're going to be speaking at the end of the interview a little bit. So just a short to present your books. You got many books. So I retained about 5 that could be bought through Amazon, I think.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. First of all, I did a little planning for the interview. So you're a chief executive officer. Are you made or you built a movement like a National Conversation Organization?
Yes.
We understand it's a think tank.
No, it's not. The National Conversation was being designed to bring people together all across the country. We plan to go to 4 cities, towns, whatever it turns out to be, every year, and effectively hold meetings with local people, because we're interested not in telling them the way we think it ought to be, but we were interested in hearing what they think is needed in the country. And I know this may come as a surprise. There are some things on which everybody can agree, but depending upon where you live, you have a different perspective. And so we wanted to travel around and find out what that perspective is. And we only just started. Our first meeting was in Dallas, Texas in October last year. And we will not be meeting probably until the spring, until we get all the bad weather behind us. And then there are a number of different places that who want to host us, and we'll publish that when it becomes known.
Do you plan to come in Canada? And I've seen.
No, I don't think the Canadian government is going to invite us. But I was just in Vancouver, at the Resource Investment Conference.
But in Quebec, you're very welcome if you want to come here, or probably in France. We could help you out in that matter.
Well, we'll see down the line.
Yeah, why not? I mean, why not? Colonel, in regards to, because we're kind of puzzled with we have the MAGA, the America First, the Cato Institute, and all these. What is all about? I mean, and you said that you're different from them with your organization. Can you explain us a little bit?
Well, that's a tall order. I think we have to understand that right now, the United States has no coherent foreign policy. In other words, there's no national strategy. Not only is there no national military strategy per se, but there's also no real scientific industrial strategy. In other words, we are drifting at sea. And one of the reasons that President Trump was elected was that he promised fundamental change in this drift. Instead of drifting here and there, depending upon what lobby in Washington was strongest, he was going to chart a quote unquote America First policy. That hasn't happened. And right now, I think President Trump is falling dramatically in the polls because there is roughly somewhere between 70 and 75% polling suggesting opposition to a war with Iran. One of the things that he promised was an end to the so-called forever wars in the Middle East. He promised that he was going to find a way to end the war in Ukraine. He's changed nothing in what we are doing since he took office. So you've got a lot of people who are very frustrated right now. And also he promised that he was going to crack down on criminality, on illegal immigrants, and that we were going to round up illegal immigrants and ultimately deport them from the United States. He ran into some opposition, received a lot of bad press, and seems to have at least temporarily retreated from that position. And then finally, he promised that he would restrain or at least limit spending in terms of trying to deal with our national sovereign debt. He's actually increased it now. So virtually everything he said he was going to do, he's reversed himself and is not doing it. So you can imagine that tonight he is presenting his State of the Union speech. I think he's going to find lots of unhappy people in the audience listening to him. So we're all waiting to hear what he has to say.
Right.
But you've got to remember that all the so-called think tanks in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
are owned by various lobbies.
Okay.
We talk about the Israel lobby, which ultimately has enormous power and influence over our foreign and defense policy, but there are other lobbies. Lobbies involved with agriculture, lobbies involved with industry, the IT industry, the steel industry, the oil industries. All of these lobbies spend great quantities of money. It just so happens that the Israeli lobby, if you will, consists of multiple billionaires inside the United States who invest heavily in Congress and the White House to push us in the direction that they want us to go. In other words, in a direction they think is good for Israel. We're kind of stuck in that position right now, not just with them, but with these many other lobbies. President Trump's administration is often characterized as a transactional administration. In other words, you pay money, you expect an outcome. And with President Trump, if you pay enough money, then you can get the outcome you want. This is not something for which I or most of the people that voted for President Trump expected.
But it's kind of normal in the United States to have a group of pressure, or if you have some lobby, it's like open lobbies. And here it's in Canada, it's more hypocrite, I would say. Lobby is different, and it's more like subversive. It's more like underneath. But in the States, at least, it's open, and I mean, they're very powerful. But what annoying me about a lot from the States, because what we say in Canada, we say when United States is getting the flu, we have the cold, or vice versa.
Yes.
And now the debt is astronomical, is going skyrocketing through the roof. Now, what are your thoughts about it? I know you explained to your channel what's going on, but would you, for our people, could you explain a little bit? What do you make of that?
Well, I think what you're describing in the United States is what we refer to as legalized corruption. You have a Congress which votes itself raises in pay, a Congress which essentially arbitrarily passes legislation on the basis of how much they are personally going to benefit from it. In other words, you lift regulations, you change regulations, you alter activities in the private sector, and then you are rewarded for it through political action committees and campaign donations. So it's not as though somebody writes a check to you personally. What they do is they ensure your reelection, and that money then goes to you instead of your potential opponent. And this happens over many months and ultimately years. You reach a point where everyone on the Hill, particularly as it pertains to the Israel lobby, has been taking money from the lobby for years. And so when someone steps forward and say, we want you to support the war with Iran, you are inclined to say yes, because you don't want the money cut off, number one. But number two, you don't want the lobby to support your opponent in the next election. So it is really legalized corruption. It should be impossible, but it's not. It's everyday occurrence. And people out in the United States who are watching this sort of thing, they don't understand that they vote for a new president, a new candidate, but the policies don't change. And they ask, well, why is this? Well, it has very little to do with whom you've elected and a lot to do with where the money comes from and who pays the money to ensure that things stay on track. So when you look at Ukraine, you look at what Biden did and what Trump has been doing, there's really no difference. And of course, this has been a real sore point with the Russians and with many people who looked at Trump as potentially a breath of fresh air. There was an assumption, well, he recognizes the dangers of confrontation with Russia, recognizes that Ukraine is defeated and cannot possibly win. And on the basis of those humanitarian grounds alone, he is going to bring this to an end. He has done the opposite. And right now, it's not just the Russians, but virtually everybody in the world is largely dismissing anything that President Trump says on the grounds that he has simply not told the truth. He's misled people, let them think what they want, and then continue to do what was happening anyway. This is a problem. There's no easy solution to it.
Well, for me, I like the States because there's some kind of more like free speech. I mean, here the ex Prime Minister of Canada, which you know the name, he wants to seize the firearm of the hunters and send it out to Ukraine. I mean, that's kind of funny. That's staging. I mean, it's laughing at people today. Today we don't do that, and all kinds of all sort of thing like that. And they send money. They keep sending money and entertain that war. So,
well, remember that you're dealing with a mountain of lies. From the very beginning, Ukraine was portrayed as a victim. Russia was portrayed as this aggressor who simply woke up one morning in February of 2022 and decided to attack Ukraine. Well, that's absolutely false. And we know that for many, many years, virtually from the moment that the Soviet state system collapsed and the Warsaw Pact was liquidated, the Russians implored us not to move the North Atlantic Treaty Organization further east. And everyone who knew the Russians well, from having sat across negotiating tables with them, pleaded with each succeeding president, don't bring in Poland, don't bring in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, don't bring in Slovakia, don't bring these countries in, especially countries with a long history of hostility to Russia. You know, if anything, these countries should be neutral, but they should not be part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Well, all of that was ignored. In addition to that, Russia in the 1990s was ruthlessly exploited by businessmen who came in and effectively set themselves up as oligarchs and stole as much as they possibly could from Russia. One of the reasons that President Putin is very popular in his country is because he reversed most of that. He went after the so-called oligarchs that had stolen property and stolen cash and left the country impoverished. Unfortunately, that did not happen in Ukraine. Ukraine remained mired in corruption, and ultimately in 2014, the Central Intelligence Agency, with the help of MI6, staged a coup that ultimately drove out the legitimately elected government and installed a new government. And this new government is now referred to openly as this neo-Nazi regime that is bent on the destruction of Russia. People need to go back and look at Zelensky. When he ran, people breathed a sigh of relief because Zelensky told the voters in Ukraine, I will make peace with Russia. I will sit down with President Putin. We will put an end to the conflict. As soon as he was installed in power, he did the opposite. And that opposite approach has resulted in this long and terrible war. And then continually, from the moment this began, the Western media has told everyone, Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is winning. Yeah. Russia is losing. Russia is weak. Russia can be defeated easily. Russia's economy can be destroyed. We have the means. We are the powerful force in the West. No one can stand against us. And effectively, that's what in April of 2022 was told to Mr. Zelensky by Boris Johnson from London, who flew in at the request of President Biden and told him, you now have all of NATO, most important, of course, the power of the United States Armed Forces and industry and economy behind you. So don't sign any peace accords, don't compromise, we'll back you and you will win. Well, we now know that the Ukrainians have lost between 1.5 and 1.8 million soldiers killed. We can't even begin to estimate the numbers of wounded because large numbers of them died of wounds because the Ukrainians did not have an effective medical evacuation system. Their hospitals were always overwhelmed. And as a result, the death toll rose precipitously, dramatically. Every single month, the Ukrainians are losing thousands of men who are still filling the trenches, many of them at gunpoint, forced to be there by the secret police, in what looks more and more like a Stalinist state. If the Ukrainians who live in Western Ukraine, that is on the west side of the river, were able to vote, I'm sure he would be out of office. We have plenty of information to that extent because we talk to German journalists, among others, who go into the country and drive around the country and talk to people. Everybody wants an end to war. Well, then how does Mr. Zelensky stay there? He's staying there because he has largely British, Israeli, and American security around him to keep him in power, to sustain the war. And the globalist elites who rule us, who are governing in your country and to a large extent govern here, they want this war to continue. They don't want it to end. And they're afraid that it might end. And I think this year we will probably see it end because the Russians militarily will put an end to it. And people say, well, why didn't the Russians do that 2 years ago? Well, first of all, they had to build up their force because it was inadequate in terms of size and capability. That was achieved in 22 and 23. But Putin was convinced that most of the Orthodox Christian Slavs were not his enemy. In other words, the Ukrainian Orthodox Christian Slav is someone we don't want to kill. Well, that's true, but unfortunately, we know from experience that if someone is pushing you into a battle, you're going to shoot to stay alive. And so they didn't have much choice in Ukraine. They don't right now. But the Russians have restrained themselves and held back. It's only been within the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months that we've seen really dramatic, decisive change in the attacks with strike weapons, aircraft, missiles, rockets, and so forth, and the destruction of the power, the energy grid, destruction of the transportation structure, and these kinds of things. So I think once the winter ends and the ground becomes solid, I think we're going to see some decisive maneuver on the ground. But it's not something he's wanted to do because he's always wanted to avoid war with the United States and with NATO. And he was concerned from the very beginning, if I take decisive action and we move too fast and kill too many, we could find ourselves facing European forces or even American forces on the other side. I think it's pretty obvious to him now that's not going to happen. Europeans really have nobody to send. I don't see personally any appetite in Europe to march into Eastern Ukraine and fight Russians.
Even Macron wants to go there and absolutely.
Well, he should be suited up, fitted with a parachute, and dropped into Eastern Ukraine immediately, where he can lead everybody. It's not going to happen. So now we have the latest stupidity, which apparently involves Macron and Starmer, who are discussing the possibility of giving Ukraine tactical nuclear weapons. That is a red line that the Russians will not accept, and they will use tactical nuclear weapons themselves to destroy anything in Western Ukraine that they think could hold or harbor such a weapon system. This is a catastrophe. It needs to end. But as I said before, if you admit that you've lost and you're one of the globalists like Mr. Macron, then eventually it's going to become clear that you've been lying nonstop for almost 4 years. And when that becomes obvious, how do you stay in office? I think Starmer faces that. Merz faces it. Macron faces it. I think Maloney has decided to get off the train.
In Italy,
Now the Danes and the Swedes and I guess the Norwegians and the Finns have been remarkably thoughtless. They seem to want to stay on the train. I hope they get off, but it's not going to work. The Russians are going to end this on their terms. We've refused to negotiate. We can't expect anything else to happen. And President Trump, remember, he is effectively the leader of NATO. And it is up to him to talk to the rest of the heads of state and say, this must end. He's never done that. So he's never changed his policy. It's still the Biden policy.
So it's probably because of the pressure he's got from the groups and the lobbyists. The lobby wants something else. Now,
well, if you look at the 9, 10, 11 Zionist billionaires that are driving us to war against Iran, they are also driving us to war in Ukraine. They've said, okay, we won't put troops there. All right, we won't directly engage, although we do have evidence that some U.S. pilots have voluntarily flown F-16s for the Ukrainian Air Force. I think that's a very dangerous practice that should stop immediately. We're not the only ones. I think the Dutch and pilots from some other NATO countries have also done it. But I think the problem right now is that President Trump has chosen to walk away from the event. He said, fine, let the money flow, let the equipment flow. I'm not going to get involved anymore. The Europeans can't agree, so I'm going elsewhere. Yeah. Elsewhere, I suspect, is the Middle East and Latin America. Yeah. And I think that's a serious mistake.
Well, from here, our perspective is that in Ukraine, that Ukraine and the narrative here is that with the mainstream media, they say Putin invaded illegally the Ukraine. But since the Minsk Accord or the Minsk, what happened there with in regards to Putin and everything, they say it's illegal. But and on top of that, they say after Ukraine, they're gonna invade other countries abroad on the side. So that's not the.
Well, that's I'm talking to people on the ground over there in Russia and in Ukraine and Poland. There's no evidence for that. The Russians recognize that they don't have enough military power to effectively launch a major offensive into Europe. In fact, it was 1982, after the declaration of martial law in Poland, that then Marshal Kulikov, who commanded what we would call the European theater, and he was simultaneously had the title of Commander-in-Chief of the Warsaw Pact. He went to the Politburo and explained to them it was now impossible, this is in 1982, for the Soviet military establishment to launch an attack on the West because Poland was totally unstable and they could no longer rely on stability in their rear areas as they advanced west. They also pointed to the high probability that their missile arsenal would not achieve what they had originally intended it to achieve, which was on the conventional level to utterly paralyze the West. My point is that was 1982. This when the Soviets had over 1 million men in uniform and could mobilize millions more and had the equipment for them. This is 2026. The Russians have mobilized only what they needed to build up the force to win the war in Ukraine. And they have made it very clear they have no intention of going anywhere else. They don't want to have to cross the Dnieper River. They don't want to advance to the Polish border. Yeah. In fact, in Moscow, the joke is, can't the Poles take over the Western Ukrainians? They used to run the place, let them have it. And everybody laughs because they know from historical experience, Ukrainians hate the Poles. And right now, if you ask the average Pole on the street what he wants as a result of the war in Ukraine to end, is to send the Ukrainians back to Ukraine and get them out of Poland. Yeah. I mean, the point is, there is no interest in the war that people continue to insist there is. I don't know where this woman Callas came from, what planet she's been living on, but there is no appetite for what she says whatsoever in Russia. None.
Yeah. On top of that, when the war started, I was saying that's just too bad because in all these conflicts, the civilians are suffering of that. They've been killed on the ground, they on the soil, on the country. It's very bad for the civilians, and a war is very dirty, and they lie. There's no truth to have to get from, and this is what the people are scaring from, and to that the extent of the war. Now, in regards to NATO, is President Trump is in charge of that. So Putin was very against the NATO, because since 1945, or the Second World War, NATO advanced and advanced and advanced, and it took advantage of the Russia. And to justify the war or justify the military, you have to have an adversary. You have to have someone to fight against. And then they found out that Russian would be good then.
I think there was always an interest in resuscitating the old threat picture from Russia. There's no question about that. But I think the larger issue is this. NATO is now dead man walking. The organization has no purpose. The organization was never created to attack anyone. It was created exclusively for defense. And it was successful when it was defensive. In the 1990s, there were people in Washington who said, if we can't find something for NATO to do, it will go out of business. Well, I was in the 90s in Europe. And in 1994, 95, 96, 97, when I was over there on numerous occasions, I and other European officers, we would talk and we said, well, perhaps it's time for NATO to go away.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's time for the Europeans to determine their own future, no longer be dependent upon us. Well, at the same time that we were saying these things, sadly, tragically, the Europeans were dismantling their armed forces. The Germans were liquidating the German army, which was, at the time, the best army in Europe. The French liquidated most of their force. What you have now, as Dominique Deloire would say routinely to me, are boutique forces. You know, he said the French army is structured and organized to go on safari in North Africa. The British army is structured and organized to intervene in other little countries in the Caribbean or Africa or parts of Asia. Wasn't organized, trained, or equipped to fight anybody who could really fight back.
So Canada.
Yeah, that's right. So the point is, the best thing we can do for the Europeans is to get out. Well, now the Europeans, when they hear that, they act like children that come from a very rich family where they've been spoiled for years. They've never had to work hard. They've never had to do much.
Yeah.
And they tell daddy, well, daddy, you're cutting us off. And daddy wants to cut them off. We have reasons to do that now that are financial, not just strategic. But the point is, there is no imminent threat from Russia, number one. Right. Number two, the Europeans collectively need to figure out how they want to secure themselves. And I have argued for a long time that the view of let's say, from Stockholm and Berlin is somewhat similar, but the view from Paris and Madrid is very different, as is the view from Rome or Athens.
That's right.
So perhaps instead of one organizational construct for all of Europe, perhaps you need some regional security organizations. But the notion that we should go backward in history and try to build alliances that then wait for an opportunity to go to war, which is what happened in 1914. Well, what's the trigger? Well, the danger is that Austria is mobilizing against Serbia. The Germans are going to back the Austrians. The Tsar decides he's going to mobilize because he's afraid of what's happening to the Serbs and the mobilization of Germany. And the French say, well, this is our opportunity to regain control of Alsace-Lorraine. We don't need organizational constructs designed for that. We don't need hair triggers for war. And finally, war, I think in the minds of most people, certainly in Northeast Asia, I think in Europe and here in North America, doesn't have much utility. What do you get out of war? Destruction? How does destruction help us? How does it help us to destroy anybody? How does it help anybody else to destroy us? The answer is it doesn't.
Yeah.
So, you would think that rationality would have finally found its way into the halls of power. And at the moment, the most rationality I see is in Moscow and Beijing. They're far more rational than we are. We have fools running around in Washington, London, and Paris who think that war is something to be played with, that war is something that happens on other people's soil, that you can destroy everything from high altitude and your enemy has no choice but to surrender.
Yeah.
That's just not true.
In respect to that, Colonel, do you think that before or within the next decade, we're going to be seeing a country attacking another with a nuclear weapon?
Well, obviously, I hope not, because the use of any nuclear weapon risks almost immediate escalation. And I say this all the time when I go into Washington, I talk to members of the government, and most of the time they agree. There are a few that do not, however. They believe in this thing called a tactical nuclear weapon. And I always ask them, so you think if a tactical nuclear weapon is launched against the Russians in Russia, that they're all going to say, wait, that's a little nuke. That's not a big nuke. It's okay.
That's a dirty bomb or something like that?
Yeah. I said, have you lost your minds? Every simulation, every model, every examination always results in the same thing. The other side says, well, I better strike now with all that I've got or I'll lose it. And you end up in a full-fledged nuclear war. It rapidly escalates. So I hope not. But I can't rule it out because the stupidity and irrationality at high levels is really quite rampant.
Well, I fully agree with you. Like you say, there's no common sense in that. What we think it's the lobbyists or the lobby that pull on their side, and they make all that chaos. What I think I got most respect for the administration in the United States for the Constitution, for the flag. This no problem. I got respect for President Trump. But we look at that. I mean, he's in Greenland, he's in South America, he's there with Iran, Ukraine. We think that it's all chaos. We don't know where it's going through. I mean, makes me think that it's just like an old movie of Charlie Chaplin in black and white, where he was just rolling the globe in his hand. We just in spot somewhere. I mean, where is that going to? I mean, he's everywhere, and it seems that nothing happened. There's no action besides the tariffs and everything. What you make of that?
I think we have to keep in mind that Mr. Trump is preeminently a marketing genius. That's what he does best. He markets himself and his brand. And as a result, you've got to stop and listen and then look at what you just described. Listen, I suppose in some respects you could argue, listen less to what is said and look at more of what is done or not done. And clearly, there's remarkably little action, which is probably for the best. But the problem in the meantime is that you create unnecessary chaos and instability. And if you're interested in a stable economy, then you don't want chaos. Capital flees conflict and crisis zones. Capital is attracted to stability. I mean, I go through these arguments with some of my clients. I said, you've got to understand the Chinese advantage is not simply that they have rare earths, they refine them. And they have not arbitrarily, but certainly to some extent artificially lowered the cost of energy to the point where no one can compete with them effectively when it comes to refining rare earths. Price stability is absolutely essential to the people who produce anything.
Yeah.
You've got to have price stability. The supply chains can't operate if you're constantly threatening other countries and warning them that you may go to war. So we are not just creating instability in terms of pricing of products and resources in the United States, which hurts us. We're also destroying destroying supply chains unnecessarily.
Yeah.
The supply chain, they'll just move somewhere else. We don't get it. We think the world of 1991 is today's world, and that everyone is, quote unquote, stuck with us. How many times have you heard President Trump say, well, we're the biggest economy in the world. We have the biggest market. They have no choice. Well, it sounds great in theory, but it doesn't work that way in principle. The rest of the world does have a choice. And what we witness every day is more de-dollarization, people walking away from the currency, walking away from doing business in our currency, walking away from doing business with us.
With the BRICS is this, and they tried before, to do that. To get away from petrodollar and to escape from that. They Gaddafi, I think, was trying to do it, and many people trying to. Now the BRICS are threatened the American dollar. And
well, the Chinese are moving increasingly to gold-backed currency.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think you're going to see in the BRICS countries, and right now I think they have 10 members. There's something like 50 waiting to join. And before they're through, I suspect that they'll have most countries on the planet involved in their system.
Yeah.
And you're going to see it may not just be gold, it may turn into gold and silver and platinum or whatever.
That's right.
But the currency is going to have real value. The problem for us is fiat currency that is printed without being backed by anything except faith and confidence in the United States.
Imagine that the reserve in Canada is $0. We don't have any gold, and I'm preoccupied myself. That's why I would say I will tell you that Quebec wants to split from the rest of Canada, and that's what and so Trump just came out with the 51st states. That was an old idea coming from Quebec, the people that want to split, and this
well,
is
the French people of Quebec have fought tirelessly to preserve their identity.
That's right.
Their language, their culture. There are people living in Quebec who can trace their ancestry back to the 1600s when the colonization actually began.
That's right.
And I think, to be perfectly frank, Quebec deserves its independence. I probably shouldn't say that. Everybody will attack me in the United States for saying that. But I absolutely believe that. I think that's very true. I'm also a supporter of Puerto Rican independence.
Yeah.
For the same reason. It is not part of the United States. It's fundamentally different, has a different culture, different language. They should be on their own. There's no reason for us to be there. There's no reason for us to be in the Philippines, and never was. And we finally got out, thank God. These are legacies of imperialism. Now, what does the rest of Canada do? Well, you mentioned Alberta, but if you look at Alberta, you look at the resources in Alberta.
Yeah.
They are almost limitless wealth if they are properly managed and exploited. That can happen. And I think that's the problem here in the United States. We fail to realize we still are resource rich.
Yeah.
We can, if we're willing to manage it and exploit it effectively, we really don't need much from overseas. The reason we're dependent on China right now for a lot of these rare earths and minerals is because they refine them. So why haven't we built our own refinery? And one of the things that when I was in Vancouver, I talked to many people about, and they all sort of agreed but shook their heads. I said, we should build at least one, maybe two rare earth refineries, where you can refine everything from the usual rare earths, lithium, uranium, all of this. Right. It should be joint between ourselves and Canada. We'll place it in proximity to the borders where we have power, electric power, where we have rail lines and all these kinds of things. And everybody said, well, yeah, but Canada has terrible relations right now with America. America has terrible relations with Canada. How are we going to do that? I said, well, eventually people do reach adulthood and they figure out that these sort of squabbles are stupid, pointless, and counterproductive. The other problem, of course, that you face, it's even worse in your country than mine, is this obsession with the climate and all the suppression of technology and innovation that comes with that. I don't know how many times somebody was talking to me the other day and made a list of all the statements by the sort of climatologists telling us that in 36 months, the earth would die, or 48 months, the earth will be dead. This goes all the way back to the early 1990s forward.
Yeah.
We've got to wake up and recognize that's not necessarily true. The other thing is, you can do things with technology today that we couldn't do 30 years ago that curbs a lot of that pollution.
Yeah.
In other words, we can deal with this. But a rare earth refinery to build today is probably a $1.2 billion expense. Well, how many billions of dollars did we spend to bomb the Houthis?
Yeah.
How much money did we waste kidnapping Maduro and his wife in Venezuela?
Yeah.
I hope nobody in France thinks that we control Venezuela, because we don't.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's a joke. This stuff is insane. So we need to reallocate our resources and money, particularly our financial resources, to what's important to us here at home. And I think if the Europeans looked at things that way, they would be in a similar position. They need to do the same thing. You know that the largest concentration of rare earths in Europe was recently discovered right off the coast of Norway. It sits at about 250 feet of water, which is almost nothing. And it's right offshore within a mile or two. Well, the Norwegians have decided they're not going to exploit it because of environmental considerations.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. What about the rest of Europe? I guess my point is, instead of wasting time, money, and resources on finding ways to destroy Russia, destroy Iran, harm China, whatever it is, we need to start focusing our resources inside our own countries.
Yeah.
In order to improve our standard of living and strengthen our economies, because the economy is always the foundation for all of your military power and for your foreign policy.
I remember, probably you remember, Colonel, crossing the border without a passport. I mean, that was the longest border free of, trading and going in and out, no problem. I mean, and people, they don't remember that. But since Hillary Clinton came and say all the terrorists are from Canada, now she said that. I mean, she pointed out British Columbia because they stopped someone that was with bad intention, whatever. And then she said that. She claimed that in Plattsburgh, New York. She came and say, hey, and since then, we begin to have trouble crossing the border because they want to have the passport and this and this. Now, and after that, we were stealing United States. Now, we don't steal United States. That's the government. They took advantage of that. Yeah, that was the deal. And that's just too bad. I mean, we were very
well. Michel, in fairness to both the Canadian and American governments, we've done a pretty terrible job with immigration.
Yeah,
and that is a source of many of our problems. We've allowed too many people to come in who are fundamentally different and have made it abundantly clear that they plan to remain that way. And their expectation is that all of us will adapt to them. I mean, this is a strange set of circumstances. I don't know what it was like in Canada 200 or 150 years ago or 100 years ago, but our experience in the United States was that if you came to the United States, then you would have to adapt in order to assimilate. That meant that you not only had to speak English, you had to obey our laws, you had to adopt our way of life.
Yeah.
Suddenly, that changed. And we said, oh no, if you want to erect some new version of Syria or India or China or somewhere else inside our country, that's fine. It isn't fine. It doesn't work.
Okay.
It's trouble.
Do you think, Colonel, that in regards to that 51st state, I mean, we look backward, and since Benjamin Franklin and the Boston Tea Party and all these that happened within the American wants us, the Canadian, to fight against the British back then, and today it comes out to the 51st state. which some people take it very seriously here, because we have a lot of resource. We have the St. Lawrence River, we have all the water, we have all the rare earth, like you were saying, we have all the resource, and probably oil. Probably there's some oil in Quebec now, and people wants to split from the rest of Canada, which want for a different reason. The Alberta wants to split from the rest of Canada, and well, Donald Trump was saying, well, the border, it's this, and we trace back now. What do you make of that? I mean, we would like to. Some people would like to join the United States, but they're scared of losing their identity, like you were saying, their languages, the way they were living.
Yeah.
Like, do you think if this is feasible first, and second, do you think if it realize that if we're going to be having the French Canadian will be having some trouble in that making sense, because in States I understand that's it's all English, whatever, and there's an article in the whatever they say that all the countries should be English, so, and they're scared of losing their language. So what do you make of that?
I think that we in the United States need to focus first and foremost on how we govern ourselves. There are lots of Americans who are very dissatisfied with Washington, D.C. Many of them are also frustrated with state governments. Before I set out to incorporate or assimilate somebody else, I would focus first here inside the United States. That's my basic answer. Now, as far as do others want to join us, my view is that if I were in charge, I would say, well, we can look at some form of confederation, but I would not want to govern vast stretches of Canada from Washington. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah,
we have enough trouble as it is. In other words, you can make this thing as large as you want.
Yeah.
Bigger is not always better. I think we've got a problem in the United States that you don't. We have 50 states. That's not a bonus. If you look at the size of these states, where they're located, we really need to think about reorganizing the way we think about the United States and how we govern it. I would take the 50 states and turn them into 7 regions. But nobody wants to hear that. Everybody wants to keep things as they are right now. But I think where we're headed right now is going to lead us into a serious financial crisis. We are, in fact, financially ruined thanks to our reckless spending and this fiat currency. When we went off the gold standard, that meant that we could spend money without accountability.
Yeah.
Prior to coming off the gold standard, we could not simply wage war because we had to raise taxes to pay for it. Once you went off the gold standard and you had fiat currency that was based on faith and confidence in the U.S. government, that meant you could wage war as often and as much as you liked anywhere you wanted to go. And it's worked, because most Americans on any given day don't pay attention to what happens beyond their borders. I mean, this used to be essentially an advantage. Americans were focused at home. You've heard this term isolationism. We were never interested in being isolated from business and commercial ties and culturally, but we were always interested in being isolated from other people's wars. That was the meaning of isolationism.
Okay.
We have abandoned all that. Now we want to be involved everywhere with everyone. It doesn't work. It's financially ruinous, and it's going to end whether we like it or not. So instead of worrying about whether Alberta can join or not join, I would say let's wait and see what happens over the next few years, because I think the situation here in America is going to change dramatically. The time is coming when suddenly somebody's going to say, look, we can't go on like this. We can't afford it. It's beyond our means.
Okay.
And all those ships that are all over the world are going to come home, and they're going to end up in a harbor someplace. All the troops are going to come home for the same reason.
Yeah.
We can't afford it. It's not in us either. It's not our nature. It's artificial. It's all a function of this experience during the Cold War. And then when the Cold War ended, instead of doing what made sense, which was to say, sayonara, thank you, we're going home to tend to our own affairs, we stayed in places we didn't need to be.
Okay. And because here in Quebec, they want to separate, they want a new separatist party, whatever. and they feel that they're not welcome within the rest of Canada, and they feel that for many years. You know, we came from one time all Canada, all through was all French, was and south of the United States until Louisiana. Well, we don't want to. Here, people don't want to become like another Louisiana, so they say, "Oh, we can manage that." Probably, Colonel Macgregor has an idea about it. So I'm glad that you just stated.
Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble with the Canadian government. I simply stated what I believe, which is,
Yeah.
you know, you've survived. You've stood the test of time.
Yeah.
You have a genuine identity, and you want to move down a different path.
Yeah.
And I would not stand in the way. Now I've got to, we've got to end this because I've got another
yes, Colonel,
4 minutes.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes left. That's too short. I mean, for well, thank you very much. But just to recall to our public that your book is available to Amazon, and
my books are out there. There are 5 of them, but I would urge everyone to read Margin of Victory.
Okay,
it's the last I wrote.
Yeah,
and it talked a lot about the dominant structure of warfare in the future, which I described as the links between intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and strike weapons launched from the air, the sea, and on land.
Yeah.
And effectively, that's what the Russians have done brilliantly in Ukraine, which has resulted in the mass destruction of Ukrainian life.
Also, Also, I'm sorry.
No, the other books, Transformation Under Fire, that's worth viewing. That was a very narrowly focused book on the same subject matter. The Israelis took it to heart, translated into Hebrew. It was translated into Korean. The Chinese like it very much. The Chinese translated Breaking the Phalanx and Transformation Under Fire into Chinese. Breaking the Phalanx was publicly available in Chinese. You had to read the Chinese General Staff Journal to see it in Chinese, and that is Transformation Under Fire. But I would, look at those. They're snapshots in time, trying to understand where things are going. And I think Margin of Victory still has relevance.
Yeah. Also, you have the Soviet East Germany Military Alliance.
Well, that was my doctoral dissertation. And that was published by Cambridge University Press. And I was trying to explain to people that Germany would be reunited and that Russia would ultimately vote for reunification with West Germany and abandoned East Germany. But it was all about the military ties, which were very effective. And there was a lot to be learned from how the Soviets organized and equipped the Germans after World War II. Anyway, I got to go.
Yes, Colonel.
I wish you the best. Thank you for inviting me to be here, and God bless everyone in Quebec and in Canada.
Well, God bless you too. We hope